Well, I'm going to talk about marketing in Web3. You got to do it, otherwise no one's going to find out about what you're building. I'm going to start with some tweets from 2021 from our very own Chris Dixon. Web2 is built on advertising. Big companies like Facebook and Google make most of their money on advertising. It's funny, for Facebook, it's still in the 90-something% of their revenue. For Google, it's in the 80s. And many Web2 startups build their customer base using advertising. When you build a business on advertising, the theory is that if you retain enough customers, the long-term economics will work out, and you'll eventually be profitable. Web3 takes a different approach by letting users and builders participate in the growth of networks as genuine owners. That means you no longer need advertising. Tokens are self-marketing. When someone genuinely owns something and feels skin in the game, they want to evangelize it. And I actually added something here to his tweet, which is nuance. The marketing just becomes the mechanism, design, and implementation of the self-marketing machine. That process still requires a marketing type skill set, but we're applying it in a new way. So that sets the stage. Web2 marketing is really different from Web3 marketing. Some things are the same, some things are different. We're going to talk about how marketing works. We're going to talk about how Web3 marketing is different, how to start marketing, and what we've seen work well. We have, between building the first Web3 marketing team at Consensus and Serotonin, we've probably seen more Web3 projects launch and go to market than anybody else, and there are a lot of patterns of what we've seen work. And we're going to share, I think, the highest impact ones. Some themes recur. So community is going to be something we talk about, and that can be kind of a hand-wavy word, but we're going to be really literal and tactical about it. It means something very specific. Incentive design. So how are we going to motivate people to do stuff on their own, of their own accord? And then trust. Trust is a really big deal in our space. We talk a lot about trustlessness. A lot of the technology we're building is designed to take human subjectivity, groups of humans deciding things in opaque rooms. We're trying to take that out of the equation. But getting people to actually start using our technology often requires having them trust us. So there's a bit of a human element. OK, let's get started. So marketing fundamentals. These are true in Web 2. They're true in Web 3. There's nothing you can do about them. You got to know your product. And right now, you guys are founders, so you know your product really well. A lot of you are probably technical. A lot of you are engineers. But you might not be, or you might be employing someone at some point who is a marketer, who is a CMO or a head of marketing, and that person might not have a computer science degree. And they need to, and you need to, really know your product. If they're not technical, they need to ask technical people about how it works and to really understand how it works as best as they possibly can in order to be able to talk about it, especially if you're marketing to a technical audience. The next is know your audience. True in the traditional world, true in Web 2, very true in Web 3. And just because you're building a Web 3 product doesn't mean you're going after a typical Web 3 type of audience. You could be going after a new kind of audience that hasn't been introduced to Web 3 yet. You could be going for a very specific niche within Web 3. So you have to know who those people are and really talk to them and not fake it. Identify your audience channels. So those people that are in your target audience, what are they paying attention to? What do they care about? What kinds of problems do they have that they actually want to solve? Define your key message. How are you going to reach them on those channels that they're paying attention to, and what are you going to say? Build a marketing funnel. So when you first reach them, they're discovering you, your message, your brand for the first time, and then what do they do? You have to have some way to engage them. Then you have to have some way to convert them to using your product. Then you need some kind of mechanism to retain them. That thing is called a marketing funnel. We're going to go into that in a lot of detail because it doesn't make sense to start doing the activities at the top until you've built out the funnel, because you got to capture the energy that comes in from the top and turn it into stuff. Otherwise, imagine like a funnel that's broken and water or something under pressure going through it just comes out the sides. So you got to send people down the whole thing, measure how it's working. So at each of the catalysts of that funnel, let's say people discover your product, then you're converting them to engaging with it, then you're converting them to using it. You need to measure how well each of those catalyst moments is actually going in order to make sure there aren't certain spots in your funnel that are broken. And it's cool if you identify spots that are broken because you can do something else and optimize them. So you got to set your metrics at each of those catalyst phases in order to understand what's working and what's not and optimize. So those are truths about marketing just in general, Web 2, Web 3, traditional world. But there are some really specific things about marketing in Web 3. What is marketing in Web 3? A lot of times we think of marketing, when I first started the marketing team at Consensus, there was sort of like a hangover from Web 2 about the word marketing, where it conveys this idea of trying to sell people things they don't want. You think of influencers on Instagram hawking vitamin waters with hashtag ad, and the early people in our space, in the Ethereum community, very academic, or they're kind of basement hackers, and they don't like that kind of thing. And so they're worried about starting a marketing team or starting to market Ethereum. But marketing in Web 3 is more like a matchmaking exercise, or it's a good way to think about it. You're almost like a market maker. You're connecting people who would use a product, if only they knew about it, with the product. And so you're matching people up, connecting dots. And then you're solving the 0 to 1 problem of building early community. No matter how well you've designed a self-marketing system, like what Chris Dixon was tweeting about, it can be the best designed system in the world that's going to intrinsically motivate people to go out and grow your project, but you need to tell people about that in the first place so they get plugged into your incentive design system. And that's the problem you guys are all solving early on, is that 0 to 1 problem of plugging people into your incentive design. So a lot of the activities we're talking about in here are 0 to 1 stuff. And then once you've plugged people into that incentive system, if you're a true Web 3 project, that means you want to decentralize your marketing over time to your community. So you want to pass off functions maybe like growing your code base, bug bounties, meme contests, but also a bunch of marketing functions to your community as you go. Web 2 marketing is different from Web 3 marketing in some really notable ways. So if you've ever done marketing in a Web 2 context, you notice that you are constantly using these third-party platforms like Google Ads and like the various Meta business suites. And in the Web 2 world, marketing is basically an arbitrage between the cost to acquire a customer and lifetime customer value. And that arbitrage takes place on these third-party platforms so that you're constantly paying the piper to keep spinning the flywheel of growth and continue being able to target your own audience. And you get addicted to that. In Web 3, there's much more of an emphasis on owned and earned marketing, and we're going to talk about what those things are. Part of that is because of the stage. A lot of Web 3 startups are earlier stage, and before you can measure things like lifetime customer value and ROI, it usually doesn't make sense to actually do big paid marketing campaigns because you can't measure that stuff. So earlier stage is generally more owned and earned, but we see a lot of that in Web 3. And it's cool because it means that a lot of Web 3 projects haven't and won't pay the Web 2 piper to market themselves the way that companies did in the last big technology movement. So that's interesting. So instead of that marketing taking place as this arbitrage in the middle, what you're doing in Web 3 is building an incentive-aligned community that's going to be motivated to go out and grow your project. And if you just look at that contrast, you see that probably Web 3 marketing is more sustainable over time because you don't have to constantly pay. It's not this top-down thing. You're incentivizing people to take actions themselves from the bottom up. So in Web 2, your incentive as you grow your spend, as you define those margins, is to build this large centralized marketing team made of hundreds, thousands of W2 employees. In Web 3, what we see a lot, especially as projects are DAOs or decentralized or really invite their communities into their incentive systems, you see really flexible and lean marketing teams that are sometimes composed of investors and builders and users taking the initiative to help you market your project. And then also in Web 2, you see these top-down marketing functions where you as the marketer or the CEO or the CMO is making all the decisions and you're coming up with everything yourself. But in Web 3, the pressure's actually off you because you are identifying the locations in your community where there are sparks, where people are doing stuff that has growth potential, and you're blowing oxygen onto those things. And so you're facilitating growth and noticing what people are doing organically rather than having to come up with all the great ideas yourself. Just an example from early Ethereum land, when we were trying to spread the word about Ethereum in 2016 at Consensus, one thing we noticed organically is that meetup groups were springing up all over the world, in San Francisco, but also in Bucharest, also in Istanbul, really, truly Sao Paulo, really, truly all over. And so either we could control the messaging and say, these need to be our meetup groups. What are all these people doing? They all need to carry our message. Or what we chose to do was to organize the organizers. So we had all of the folks that were meetup organizers that started a new Ethereum meetup all over the world. We invited them into a community where we would exchange best practices, where we made sure all these meetup groups had money for beer and pizza, or the culturally appropriate equivalent, and we offered them standard decks and templates so they could make their meetup groups more official. We offered them standard images and language if they wanted to use it. And we also curated this kind of roving content series of new dApps that were being built on Ethereum to go visit all these meetup groups and talk to them, which was great for new projects because they were able to get feedback, they were able to acquire users, and the meetup organizers would always have fresh, interesting content. So it really worked for everybody. And in that way, we identified something that was already happening, we identified sparks, we facilitated rather than controlled, we blew oxygen on it, and that grew into fires. So just as a thought, just as an example for how you might do that, rather than having to come up with everything all on your own. Community. So this is a big talking point in Web3. You'll have heard everyone speaking about community. I'm actually going to just go ahead and define it because I was eating a bag of kale chips the other day, and it said on the back, we designed these kale chips for the community of people that eat multiple snacks a day. Like, there's no community of people like that. Like, I've never spoken to someone else that does that, about that. That's so weird. Like, that word's so overused, and it's certainly overused in our space, but it means something really specific. So Web3 is a substrate. It's a clay. It's a set of tools for building incentive alignments, right? That's what it is. And community is the incentive-aligned group that works together toward the success of a project. And there are these three categories: builder, investor, user. And we're here sitting in the office of an investor, but this investor also helps you get users, also is technical and can contribute to code. The users of your product could also contribute to your code. These groups used to have bright line distinctions between them in the Web 2 world, and even sometimes adversarial interests with each other, right? The company wants to sell you the cheapest possible product at the highest possible price. You want to buy the best possible product at the lowest price. The investors want to take the money out of the company while still letting the company grow. Like, everyone's misaligned, even sometimes adversarial in Web 2. What you do in Web 3 is you use the substrate of Web 3 to collapse these three groups into a single incentive-aligned thing, and that thing is called community. And the distinctions between these groups often collapse and become pretty fluid. You see this with like GameStop, and you see this with the popularity of crypto. I think we're gonna just live in a world where everybody will have some maker activities, so some builder kind of activities, some investor kind of activities, and some user kind of activities. Like no longer is investing reserved for only certain people. No longer is building reserved for people with only a certain kind of skill set, right? These things are all collapsing, and we're all taking on all these characteristics ourselves individually and participating in groups that do this. So I think that's where we're going. This is a really simple marketing funnel. You can make a more complicated one. If you've ever read a marketing book, I bet they had a more complicated one. But this basically works. You want to have your message be on a channel where your target audience is going to reach you and discover it. And there are some examples on there of what those channels typically are in Web3 if you're targeting a Web3 kind of audience. Then there's a catalyst, or look over on the left, a CTA, a call to action, that's going to take you to the next step of the funnel. That next step is engagement. Engagement is a contract between you and the potential user where they say, you're allowed to reach me again. So whatever you've said when you first reached them in discovery has gotten them interested enough for them to say to you, okay, you can reach me again. And maybe I've signed up for something, maybe I've joined a community, maybe I've followed you on a channel, but whatever it is, congratulations, you can now reach that person again, potentially. Then the next step is converting them to use your product. And by the way, you can hold people in an engagement holding tank, AKA community, for as long as you want, even before you have your product ready. And that's all right, as long as you have stuff to engage them with. And I would definitely recommend actually starting to build that engagement holding tank even before you have your product ready. The moment that you have something to say, the moment that you know who you are and what you're building, I would start actually building this and keeping people in there. It's almost like an engine full of, electrons that are moving at a certain speed, and you have to keep them moving, and then you can activate them and catalyze them to do the next thing you want them to do, which is moving on to using your product when you're ready. So then you catalyze them to using your product. Maybe that call to action is download. Maybe it's connect your wallet. Maybe it's trade, swap, stake, depending on what you're doing. And then your work is not over. You want to keep them coming back. And they're also going to be competitors, potentially, who are trying to lure your user away. So there has to be some reason why they stick with you, as opposed to leaving for the competition. And that's retention. And there's some really cool stuff in the retention department that can send people all the way back to the top of the funnel if you want to incentivize people to refer their friends. That can be a really great channel for discovery and a great way to spin the flywheel of growth. So now we're going to do an exercise for 5 minutes. Do you have a pen? Yeah? Got a pen? Got the papers? So the marketing funnel is up here, and you've got it there. And then there's a blank one, kind of like a Mad Lib. And so if you want to take 5 minutes and fill that out for your startup, what is your channel for people to discover your product or project? What's your catalyst or call to action for people to start engaging with it? Then what kind of engagement holding tank are you going to keep people in and keep them active in? Then how are you going to action them into starting to use your product? And then what's the channel where they're actually using your product? And then how are you going to catalyze them into staying and coming back and using it again, doing the thing again? And then are you going to send them back over the top, back into the top of discovery? So I'm going to be quiet for 5 minutes, believe it or not, and go on an adventure. All right, did that work? Was that interesting to think about? Cool. It's not random. You want to plan it. Great. So this is also on the next page of your packet and might offer some inspo for what you want to put in that funnel if you're filling this out later or playing with it. But these are some examples of organic owned, organic earned, and paid channels. And you want to maybe keep this and look at it when you're thinking about your marketing, either now or later, because it could inspire you to think of a channel that you wouldn't have used perhaps otherwise. As we mentioned earlier, there is a lot of use of owned and earned channels in our space because it's zero cost other than the overhead of maybe hiring a PR person, let's say. So owned channels are things that are on surfaces that you control. So that's your website. Website is really important. We're going to talk about that. It's an email newsletter if you're sending out the email newsletter. It's a blog if it's your blog. If you have a community channel or a social channel, that's owned because it's yours. Although, you know, these platforms, these Web 2 platforms are censorable, so they could take it all away in a moment, but let's call that owned. Events, if you're hosting them yourself, you control what's in there, so that's owned. Earned is something that involves a third party allowing you to use their channel. And what's cool about using a patchwork of owned and earned is that when you show up on an earned channel, it means that somebody else was willing to carry your message and thinks, okay, this project or product is good enough for me to co-sign it by talking about it on my own channel. And so you want to have both. And it doesn't have to be traditional media. Not every project goes and gets traditional media coverage or even niche media coverage, but you can, and you should if you can. But there's also earned speaking at conferences or meetups, being a mentor, at a hackathon. These are all earned opportunities. Then there are earned content opportunities. So if you can write a guest post or op-ed, if you can write a guest post on the blog of another company, and then there's partner co-marketing. So if you have a B2B partnership with another company, cross-amplifying on each other's channels. Then there's organic influencer. We're going to talk more about that. So showing up on the channels, community channels, social channels of aligned people. Those could be investors, they could be users, they could be B2B partners. Those are all examples of earned, and you want to have a patchwork. I really think there's no such thing as pure PR anymore. There's no such thing as pure content. It's just a big old soup of attention. And you got to figure out what your target audience is paying attention to. It's going to be a lot of different channels, and then you got to have your message be on all of them and be really consistent across them. So don't think you just get to pick one of these. You're going to pick the ones that correspond with where your audience is. You're not just choosing randomly from here. You're choosing based on the data of what your audience is paying attention to. So then there's paid, and people in our space do use paid. You want to have some kind of way to measure ROI once you're doing paid spend. Otherwise, you're spending money into a vacuum. And you really want to only grow your paid campaigns once you have some kind of traction or product market fit and some mechanism for measuring the ROI of paid campaigns. But you can do them. And basically your early startup marketing activities are just mechanisms for probing the market for early signs of traction and product market fit. And so they shouldn't be super expensive because you're just probing that surface to try to see where you find some traction. And then when you find that traction, when you find those first kind of granules of fit, then you want to start throwing money after them. And in our space, you know, we know that there's paid social. When I was building the original marketing team for Web3 at Consensus, almost everybody who applied to those jobs had this very kind of calcified Web2 marketing skill set where they were really used to managing these big paid campaigns and optimizing them on the various Facebook, now Meta business suites. But at the time, in 2016, 2017, those channels had actually banned all crypto language. So you couldn't say Bitcoin, you couldn't say Ether, crypto, blockchain, or your ad would literally get banned. You couldn't use it on Google, none of the Meta suites, Twitter. You couldn't even use MailChimp if you were doing paid crypto stuff because everyone was terrified. Everyone still is terrified. But now you can do that. And so we had to return to the original roots of the marketing discipline, which are much more kind of growth hackery roots, and get out of that kind of calcified, running a big paid spend Web2 mentality, which is how we kind of backtracked into this mentality of, okay, what's up with your product? What's up with your audience? Where are they paying attention? Let's just go to those channels. Let's not do it the traditional way. Let's not do it with this big paid spend. So we know those platforms are available. Now we can use them as crypto projects, as Web3 projects. That's fine, and maybe there's a time to do that. But there are a lot of other great things you can pay for. So sponsorships of conferences, side events at conferences, those are really popular in our space. Paid media, so there are a lot of podcasts that people in the Web3 space listen to, a lot of different YouTube shows. You can pay influencers, but I don't really recommend that if you're marketing to a Web3 audience, actually, because you really want to emphasize authenticity. It's actually different in APAC markets, where people assume that messaging by KOLs is all paid, and they don't mind that. So it's very culture and market dependent. So be aware of that. And then everybody forgets about environmental ads. But we do environmental ads with clients all the time. We just did a big campaign. One of our partners, Blockdaemon, launched institutional self-custody wallet recently, and we blanketed the Austin airport for Consensus with ads that institutions can self-custody too. And then the ads end up on social, and then they get actually a lot more reach than the Austin airport. It's funny, you can repurpose a lot of these traditional channels, like environmental or even like print, and end up actually getting most of your distribution on crypto Twitter. So for example, my successor, Neil, who's now Chief Marketing Officer at Consensus, did this really cool thing where he placed an ad, just information about the Ethereum merge in the Wall Street Journal. Took out a full page. There was a QR code where you could go learn about the Ethereum merge and download and earn an NFT for reading all about the merge. And people took pictures of this Wall Street Journal ad, and that ad got all over crypto Twitter. It definitely got way more distribution on crypto Twitter than it did in the Wall Street Journal, but it was just a cool juxtaposition to have something like the Ethereum merge on a full-page ad in the Wall Street Journal. So I say this just because some of the things on here sound like old school, but there's sometimes a new school way to reimagine some of these platforms. So here are some of the audiences that we talk to in Web3. And your audience for your project or your product may not be an audience that already exists in Web3. One of our very first partners at Serotonin was Audius. And Audius is like a decentralized SoundCloud. And they were going after music fans and music creators. So these aren't the Web3 audience. You don't see any of those on here. So a lot of Web3 projects are going after some kind of new audience that isn't in Web3 yet. So this may not apply to you. And they didn't want to talk to the Web3 people. So this is dependent on your audience actually being this. But if you are trying to talk to Web3 people, these are the three types. Or the largest three types. Developers, so B2D marketing. There are kind of two main categories of developers. There are sort of solo, entrepreneurial, basement hacker types, sometimes formally trained, sometimes not formally trained. They're doing it themselves, they're doing it with small teams. And then there are enterprise or institutional devs, often more formally trained, often working for a larger company, a more established startup. So it depends, and they often know different languages and are using different kinds of software and have different kinds of mechanisms for selecting which software they want to use. So you got to know your audience. A great way to target developers is with hackathons and meetups. So then there's B2B. Enterprises or institutions, we know what those are. And then Web3 startups. So you want to think about, am I targeting a big enterprise or an institution? Am I targeting a startup? And then you want to think, who inside of that institution or who inside of that startup is going to be the decision maker about whether they want to use my technology or not? And then who are the people that are going to influence their decision? And those might not be the same people. So for example, a developer could be influential in recommending a piece of software that their engineering team wants to use, and they recommend it to their startup CEO or CTO, who then makes a decision. So you want to understand all those paths of influence about the kinds of decisions that matter for your business in the company that you're thinking of. When you think about marketing to a company, when you think about B2B marketing, how do you reach a company? How do you reach a business? Well, businesses are just made of people. And so you want to think about who these people are and reach them as people. Think about them just like your other audience groups. Where are they? Where do they live? What are they paying attention to? What kinds of content? What conferences are they going to? What meetups are they going to? What do they care about? What kinds of problems are you solving for them? What's their job? What's hard about it? What's expensive about it? What's annoying about it? Talk to them. Because businesses are just made up of people. I remember watching, this was over a decade ago, I remember watching Slack spread like wildfire through companies where I worked. And it was funny because here's how it worked. A bunch of kind of random people in the company started using Slack to talk to each other. So suddenly a bunch of business processes are happening on Slack in the company, and then other people need to interact with those business processes. And then somebody, usually someone higher up, needed to approve some kind of enterprise license because everything was happening on Slack already. Think about that, like the influencers, the decision maker, how it all happens, right? It doesn't always start at the top down. Sometimes it starts from the bottom out or the middle out, made of people. And then traders. So everything, once it gets sophisticated enough, becomes a financial product, right? Even if you're weaving baskets, if you get amazing at weaving baskets, you're going to start an awesome basket weaving company that's going to IPO, and then suddenly you're selling a financial product, not just baskets. And in our space, a lot of what we do financializes earlier because of the nature of tokenization. And so you might find yourself wishing to talk to traders, or you might just find that the truth is that traders are looking at what you're doing and it matters what they think. There are two kinds of traders. There are a lot more kinds of traders than that. But there's obviously institutional capital, but within the Web3 space, there's DeFi traders. So people that are using DeFi platforms, protocols, they're usually trading a little bit more in the fungible token world. And then there are NFT traders. So something like Blur that comes about suddenly, that's really appealing to NFT traders, right? And those people are quite different from the people that are using like Aave and Compound and Maker. When you're talking to traders, or when you care what traders think when they're visiting your site, they just need to understand, like you want to broadcast to them true metrics about your project so they can understand how it's growing, and so they can understand like the tokenomics and how demand here or growth here might result in some kind of change in your company's, how your company values things. They need to understand the levers and pulleys for how value gets created in your company through like demand over here turning into value over there. That makes sense? So this is startup school. A lot of these projects that you're working on are early. Some of them I know are further on. But I made a checklist of the MVP marketing assets that you kind of need in order to start doing marketing. We talked about this before with the funnel, but unless you have a funnel built out that's able to at least capture the energy from the discovery top of the funnel in that engagement holding tank, you're just going to have all that energy fall out of the funnel. So I would never send a partner to go, let's say, speak at a conference, or I would never have them place an op-ed or do a big press interview unless they at least have these things ready, because otherwise that energy gets created and takes effort, but then it just goes out into space and it's shouting into the void. So this is what I would have ready before you start doing all that stuff that sends energy through the top of the funnel of what you're doing. So your brand and your key message. What are you called, and what does your logo look like? And you can change this a lot later. Try not to change your name. It's great to check out if anybody has trademarked your name. It's a whole complicated mess changing it. Some people have to, but it's better to know from the start that you can keep it. Otherwise, you're going to lose some people. And then your key message. What's that elevator pitch for what you do that's really tightly aligned to solving the biggest problem that your target audience cares about the most? 1 clause, 2 clauses. You need your marketing strategy. Your marketing strategy is actually basically that funnel thing. So what channels are you going to use? What are you going to say? What are the catalysts that bring people through calls to action through each of the various steps? That's your marketing strategy. Your website. So your website is your storefront, and everything that happens on there is your fault or your opportunity, right? So you completely own that page. And so you need to use real estate on that page to convert people into taking the actions that matter the most for your business. And if your page fails to do that, it's on you, because you can change everything about that page. Unlike, let's say, placing a story in a media outlet, you kind of can't control a little bit about what goes on there, but this is the place you can control. It's your storefront, it's your store window. You can put whatever you want there, and we're gonna talk next about what to put there because it matters a lot. But you need a website. Social and community. So we have this list on a previous page of all the different social and community channels you can use. Do not start a social or community channel unless you have a plan and the staffing for how you're going to put content on that channel. There's a great analogy from city design. People get scared walking around cities when the sidewalks are empty, but they feel safe in cities when the sidewalks are full. And so you don't want any channel you start that has your branding on it to ever look like a ghost town. So that might mean, if you have a small team to begin with, having fewer channels, picking the ones that your audience is most present on, and making sure they're actually really populated with content, and that there's someone on your team that's responsible for growing them, maybe with some metrics. But don't start them if you can't staff them. Content. This can be really basic. Your website needs to say something on it. And you probably need a deck. If you're here, you probably have a deck of some sort. You might want some kind of blog that establishes your SEO key terms, saying this is what we are and what we're doing. We exist. We're building this. That's often very discoverable when people start searching for your company, when they first meet you at that event, or when they see your podcast, or when they notice your fundraise announcement. They're going to Google, or now people are using other things. They're going to ask GPT-4 once it has web access, or maybe Sydney Bing because it already has web access about your website, and then they're going to go look at your content, or they're going to go to your blog. You need all these things to get started. You don't need a million pieces of content. You don't need every social and community channel, but this is kind of the basics to get started. We're going to talk about a website because it's so important. And it's so important is because this is the moment. People come off discovery to engagement often on your website. And so this is your opportunity to, in an environment that you completely control, convert people into taking an action that has a lot of value for you. And so you might want to screenshot this. This is if this were the website of like a Series C company, it would be really lame. But this is an MVP, like early stage product website. It's just a sample website. Let's not over-index on it. Probably once you start looking around at other Web3 startup websites, you'll see a lot of them look like this to some degree. And let's just talk about what's on it a little bit. So, logo word mark up at the top on the left. It can be somewhere else too, but that's really common. You see some links. Maybe there's an about page with more info. Maybe there's a page about your team. That's really great. It warms up a project. It shows that people are willing to lend their name to it and people are behind it. Then maybe you have some social or community buttons. I have Twitter and Discord up there. Don't let that make you feel like you need to have a Twitter and a Discord. Then if you're a Web3 project, often there's a place to connect your wallet. Sometimes that's up on the right. I don't know how it ended up like this. Some conventions in our space just bootstrap themselves into existence. Then here's our primary CTA text. Do the thing we want. So that's the main thing you want people on your website to do. And you can say that to them pretty literally. Or it can articulate exactly what your value prop is. And we'll talk a little bit more about how to decide what's there. And then there's a button to actually do that thing. And then on the right, you'll see this a lot. You don't need it, but you can have it, is a product snapshot. And that product snapshot conveys that once you convert over to the other side of using this thing, it's going to solve a problem. It's going to look really simple. It's not going to be crazy. It's going to be kind of what you expect, or it's going to be even cooler. And so that's kind of perceptually conveying that that's going to be what happens when you get to the other side. And then under that, we have what I call a wall of trophies. So that's logos, if you're a B2B product, of other companies that are currently using it. Maybe someone lands there, it's aspirational, they see a company they wish their company was like, they FOMO, they want to use your product. And And then maybe you have some testimonials, the best product I've ever used. Even if you don't have users yet, you have investors. They have something to say. You can put something on there that offers that cosign, that third-party confirmation, that it's not just you saying great things about yourself, that other people, whether they're users, whether they're investors, say great things about your project. And on the right, you see I've labeled this thing the hero, you could call it the splash, and that's what pops up when you click on the website. Very few people scroll. You lose people when you scroll. People only scroll if they're really curious about what's going on. And so the most important things to you for your user to do on your website need to have proportional real estate on your hero. Because if you need people to scroll to do the thing you want them to do, you're going to lose a lot of people. So that thing needs to be there right when people land on the page. And then another way to say it is that's everything above the fold, which is an analogy from old newspaper days. Then under the fold, okay, now you're talking to the people that really care. They're doing a little bit more research. How it works, why it's great. I don't know what's there. Those are some examples. You can have a list, you can have a chart, depends on what your project is. Maybe you have some more info about your team. Maybe you have some photos. That warms it up for people to see that there are actually people behind the project. Maybe you're anons and you can't do that, and you can use like an NFT or a PFP or something, all right? At the bottom, ways to stay connected, but let's not worry about that. Almost no one made it to the bottom. Okay, so 5 minutes. You have this in your packet, and then you have an empty Mad Libs version of it for you to make your own product website. See you in 5. Useful exercise? Fab. Okay, so we have 5 more minutes. So what we're going to do is talk about this really quickly. So a lot of people think that your brand will get community and attention and traction linearly, gradually, with a smooth line, but it actually happens really jaggedly. And there are these certain moments that catalyze a lot of growth. And as a marketer, you really need to spend a lot of time making sure those moments are maximized in order to get the most value out of them. This is in your packet, but we're not going to take time to do this. Maybe you can take time to do this on your own to look at what these catalysts tend to be. Something like your first fundraise announcement, something like your first big blog post, your first partnership announcement, your first traction story from a major media outlet. Figure out what those things are for you and for your long-term plan. And you're going to want to do continuous marketing activities like making sure all of your social and community channels have content. But you also want to pour your most effort and most resources into making sure all of these big catalyst moments are really well taken care of. And so you want to think about in advance what those are for you, and there's another empty sheet in the little workbook for you to figure those out. Super quickly, going to go through some things that we've seen work really well and some examples. So there's this concept that we call instant incumbency. So trust, one of our big themes, especially if you're some kind of financial application or something that involves value, you are going to need your user to trust you with their assets. And that means that even if you started existing yesterday, that you need to convey that you're legitimate, that you're experienced, that you're going to be around a long time. And you can do that visually through visual design. You can communicate that to people. So this is Alchemy. It's one of our very first partners at Serotonin. They have a wonderful website, I think, that conveys that they are legitimate and incumbent and will be around, even though they were actually the newcomer in their category, the challenger. Here's another example. I wanted to throw this on here because this platform is actually really new, and the splash page is really simple. It's just this, but it's just so well laid out, and it's so gorgeous that it conveys that they really know what they're doing, and it inspires a sense of trust because it's so well done. Knife's edge message. So you should be able to distill the problem that you solve and what you do into a clause, maybe 2 clauses, but 1 clause is better. This is one of our partners, Collabland, Communities with Skin in the Game. What they're doing is token gating various communities to make sure you have a token to get into them. And that is what it is, right? Like you're joining a chat channel, you're joining a community, but you own some token, you have skin in the game for what that thing is. This is back to the Alchemy site, the wall of trophies. This is all a bunch of different companies that are using Alchemy, and it's right there. You don't have to scroll very much to get there. It's right on the website, and you don't want to hide your light under a bushel. If there are a bunch of people using your company, a bunch of businesses, you want to highlight them on there because it's going to convey to new users that they should use it too. Not every wall of trophies is names. You can also have a wall of trophies that's numbers. This is Osmosis, which is the leading DEX for assets on Cosmos, also one of our partners at Serotonin, and they are showing with a metric like total value locked that a lot of people are willing to trust their platform with their value. Something like trading volume, number of interchain transfers, so you can have a wall of trophies be numbers if that's more appropriate for your audience and your product. Constant co-marketing. When you're partnering with other businesses, you want to make sure to cross-amplify and reach each other's audiences and channels. It's good for everybody. Chainlink is well known in our space for having had a machine around that since the very beginning. Check out their channels to see how they're doing it. It's a great model, I think. This is something that we call endogenous influencer marketing or organic influencer marketing. A lot of the time in Web3, when you're targeting Web3 audiences, people really like authenticity. And so they don't want to hear a paid shill talking about your project. They want to hear someone that's a credible actual user or someone that has skin in the game and is invested. So what you want to do is take all of your friends, all of your business partners, all of your investors, even if they have 500 followers to 1 million followers, organize them into a channel, maybe that's a Telegram channel, so that they're leverageable repeatably to help you amplify messages when they come out. And just by being organized about that, you can get a lot of momentum. And here's an example of me doing that for a friend, and of a friend doing that for me. Building a niche media brand or community. Oftentimes we have this question of what do you do to start building your community and engaging people and keeping them engaged once they're in that holding tank if you haven't actually launched your product yet? And this is the answer. You think of your project or your company as a piece of subject matter. So we had a decentralized VPN company. We started a privacy publication, basically, for them, so that people would engage with editorially relevant privacy content, then join their community. Then they had a lot of people in the community that they could then activate into becoming users once the product was actually ready. So, and this is Casper, the mattress company. This isn't Web3 at all, but they started a kind of publication about sleep. And they're publishing content that's editorially relevant to someone curious about sleep. And then there's a call to action. Okay, maybe Casper mattress improves your sleep in some way. But you can think about the subject matter of your project or product as being like foundational to a niche media company, and start publishing content around that isn't just promoting your product, but that's editorially relevant on its own. Then we're in Web3. And as marketers, Web3 is the best toolkit that we can use to get people plugged into our incentive system and incentivize them to help work with us to grow the project. Some of the most successful token launches recently have been through the mechanism of retroactive distribution, basically going ahead and rewarding everybody for their historical use of your product based on on-chain, some kind of on-chain freeze of activity. Great example, one of the first ones of these was Uniswap with the Uni claimable, where you could plug in your wallet and claim tokens that were retroactively distributed to you, commensurate with how much you'd use the platform. And then same with Arbitrum recently. And this is one of the best mechanisms to do token launches these days that we see really popular, because it places tokens in the hands of the people that already know and love your project and are active enough to go to a claim page. Finally, the community spaceship. We often, all right, no graphic there, but that's all right. We often talk about community as a spaceship at Serotonin, which is, imagine a spaceship coming in, they put down a ladder, they land somewhere random on Earth, a bunch of people walk onto the spaceship, then they fly off forever, and those are the humans they have to colonize their new planet or whatever. They're stuck with those people forever. Your early community members are people you're going to be stuck with potentially forever. So you want to be really careful about who they are, what their intentions are. You want to do things that don't scale, talk to them one-on-one, make sure you're bringing people in that genuinely care about your project, that want to contribute to it, because they're going to set the tone for the future people that come in. If you start your community with only kind of pure extrinsic incentives and people just waiting for, when moon, we call them moon boys, when are you going to launch a token, then other people that might be better contributors or better potential community members, they see that and they don't want to join. And so you're stuck. So you want to be really careful about that early community, because that's going to be decisive to subsequent people. And then you're stuck with them. You have control as the founder at the beginning of who comes into your community. You're going to lose control. This is my book. It's in the back. Some of you have it. A lot of this is from that book. First Web3 business book from a major publisher, I think. And also there's an NFT in the front page of the book that you can use to join the Collabland token-gated Telegram community, where we're all just chatting about Web3 marketing and getting our questions answered and meeting other professionals in the space. Thank you. Here's my info. Please don't hesitate to reach out.
Yeah, thanks so much. I'm Brandon. I thought that was a phenomenal talk, so I really appreciate it. I think Audius is a really fantastic example of a product that uses Web3 technology but is marketing to a non-Web3 audience.
Oh,
and it seems like that's specifically, or in particular, pretty challenging, because if we're leaning on the incentives of that token model but marketing to a group that doesn't really want to participate, I'm just wondering, were there any best practices or learnings from that process that maybe other companies can take advantage of?
Yes, totally, and that's such a great question, because a lot of Web3 projects are going after new audiences that aren't in Web3 and bringing them into Web3, but then they have some token, and your token is going to have kind of Web3 tradery people interact with it by necessity, right? And so how do you segment that? And so when Audius came to us, they're like, we're going to launch our token, and we want to put it in the hands of our creators that have been using our platform. But we know traders are also going to be looking at this, and that Web3 people want to get involved here. But we don't want to bother our music fan community with all this Web3 nonsense. And we also don't want to be, shoving music down the throat of, God forbid, of our Web3 traders, although they might, enjoy it. But the segmentation was what it came down to. And the truth is, if you set up, what we did is you set up a page that is about the tokenomics of the project, and it said audio on it, which is the name of the token, and that was a page on the website that you could go to, and if you Googled Audius audio, it would take you directly to that page, and people that were just the music fans wouldn't even look at that page. And so I would just have a page like that that's going to auto-segment. And then what we did was actually so cool. So we launched the token. We had deadmau5 do, this was during COVID, do a Twitch live-streamed concert that was live-streamed on the front page of Twitch. And we had a code in the concert where you could text a number to claim your tokens. And also they retroactively distributed a lot of tokens to the artists and the users on the platform. A lot of artists made more money that day than they had for a year during COVID. And a lot of them were tweeting about it, which was really exciting. So that plugged them into the token incentives, even if they weren't going to pay attention to every darn thing about the token.
I love that.
That's
Thank
helpful.
you so much. Yeah. So last question real quick. I think as founders, we're kind of on the hook to educate not only the market, but also the market segment that we're going after, but also our internal staff and new people that are joining the company. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering, is there any strategy that you've seen where you can leverage internal messaging and maybe all hands material and things like that, and then almost syndicate it in a public way? Do you see a future where decentralized organizations kind of have similar messaging to internal stakeholders as they would to external? They
should. So if you're going to decentralize stuff, don't say stuff on the inside that you don't want on the outside. And also just don't put stuff in emails that you don't want on the front page of the New York Times, The inside and the outside are the same. We're no longer in these centralized comms departments where this thing is controlled. There are only these spokespeople. Things are going to go everywhere as you decentralize. So keep the messaging consistent. It's great to be the same, as below, so above. And you want to educate your full company if you're bringing in non-Web3 natives about the technology in an accessible way. One great way to do that is my book, which explains the history of Web3 from its origins in the early web. There are also really great pieces of coursework like SheFi that you can license or bring people in to educate your company about the origins of Web3. And there's starting to be good non-technical content about Web3. And everyone in the company should know that stuff. I hope that everyone in our organization, whether that's someone that works in HR, whether it's someone that is an assistant, everybody knows about how Web3 works. Everyone has done transactions. Everyone has used a DeFi protocol. It's really important.
Cool, thank you.
Hey, thanks for the great talk. This is Jess from Blockus. And so we're building in the B2B space, and we're bringing Web2 game studios to Web3.
Wow.
So really my question is just what are the most effective strategies for B2B? And yeah, what do you recommend?
Totally. So B2B, it's really hard to think about how to target a business because it's hard to identify with a business. a business isn't paying attention to anything. But businesses are made of people. So it comes down to identifying who the people are within the business that are the decision makers about using what you've built, or that are the influencers that are going to influence that decision, like people that have recommended or used like a freemium of the technology. And you want to treat those people like any other audience and really understand, okay, where are they? What are they paying attention to? What do they care about? What kinds of problems can you solve for them? And market to those people as people, is what I would say.
Makes sense. Another question is more related to budget, right? So B2B SaaS, a lot of in-person, so conferences, events, things like that. But for a company that haven't raised that much money, like it's always a trade-off. So like how much would you recommend like budgeting for those things early stage?
So when you're really early, every marketing activity you do is probing the surface of the market for fit. And that's going to be a very smooth surface at the beginning, and you're eventually going to find a little bit of texture, and you're going to want to increase spend proportionally to the amount of fit that you've identified, right? And so oftentimes events are a great top of funnel. I would recommend going to events that don't involve like a huge expensive plane trip, maybe ones that happen to be closest to you, maybe organizing meetup groups, maybe having local ambassadors, anything you can do to save money. Like early Ethereum days, we didn't go to every single meetup all over the world and incur, infinity travel costs. We talked to those people virtually and had them organize things within their own communities. So anything you can do virtually, anything you can do to activate people on the ground that are going to get excited about what you're doing, anything you can do that's local, that makes a really big difference.
Love it, love it. So let's say you have a studio in Europe that's like your number one fan, right? But you don't have a token yet because you only have 10 customers. So how do you incentivize them to organize a meetup on your behalf?
I mean, I would say that when you have 10 customers, personally, you shouldn't have a token yet. You want to build, like the ideal token launch in my mind at this point is having a bunch of time of building on-chain history and data so you can actually do a freeze of that and have a retroactive distribution that rewards people based on past behavior. I think like Web3 native people believe that when they're using a platform that involves like on-chain interactions, that perhaps there's going to be a token later. So that belief tends to be the case. And often people who are in like college, university, blockchain programs are really excited to just like be affiliated with the company as ambassadors. So and it does something for them in their own community. So I would find people that have that kind of corresponding reason. Like people can do stuff for intrinsic reasons, not just for extrinsic reasons. When we were spinning up those meetup organizers, we were giving them like beer and pizza money, but we weren't like paying them to do anything. The API of identity was kind of open for Ethereum, where people wanted to add that brand in a way to their identity. They wanted to say, I organize this in my community. You can do that with brand.
Super cool. Thanks.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for that, Amanda. That was a fantastic, fantastic talk. Please join me in thanking Amanda Cassatt.